Hello and welcome to 360 Gamercast, episode 167 for Tuesday the 6th of June 2023. I'm your host Mark Webb, gamertag Pearson ID, Steam ID, Webby360G, and joining me on this very fine evening is...
Nick Fights.
And since I switched, I was wondering what the hell that noise was.
That sounded fucking
there.
awful.
It was the GameCube. I mean, it sort of sounds...
Oh, Mummy to edit that in.
Oh, great.
The moment to edit in, good. But there was a GameCube startup sound, wasn't it?
Yep, with the little G.
The old...
Yeah. Okay, so this week is Patreon special, which is the N64 and Gamecube special, running through the Nintendo series of systems. The reason why we're doing both systems at the same time is because we could easily rattle these two off in one episode, purely because they were not my main systems at the time, and I'm pretty sure they weren't you guys either. Still great systems, nonetheless, but at the time I was more of an Xbox guy. So didn't really, I didn't buy either of these systems at launch, even though, as I say, I did play them. I played more of the 64. Didn't really play a lot of the GameCube, but we'll get into that in a bit. So yeah, it's nice to be back, and so we'll get right into it then. So guys, I mean, N64 it came at a weird time really, because it came out, I'll go through the wiki a tiny bit. It came out in... wow. So there was a big difference. There was a big gap, actually. So in Japan, it came out in June of 1996. And then it didn't come out... what came out in America, September the 26th, 96. It didn't come out in the UK till the March the 1st, 1997. So there's a little bit of a gap there, which is quite interesting. But
the same thing happens with GameCube later.
Yeah. But... this came out during the PS2 era. PS1 era?
Yeah.
No, N64 was it PS1? Oh, yes, the GameCube was during the PS2, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was quite a bit late. It was a couple of years.
Yeah, that's right, because the PlayStation came out in 95?
Yeah, 94 Japan, 95.
Yeah, and this came out in 97, yeah.
Technically, wasn't the PlayStation kind of like 128? Like the start of the 128 generation?
Well, the PS1
everything was like bits, wasn't
it?
64-bit and
so the PS1 was 32-bit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then the
N64.
Yeah.
All right.
PS2 and PS1 and Saturn were 32.
Yeah.
And then the PS2 was 128.
Yeah.
I think Dreamcast as well, and then we started ignoring bits because no one really knows what it was.
Yeah.
Now we've got what? Teraflops, whatever.
Yeah. So and that was one of the reasonings for naming of the N64 was to showcase that it was double the power, double the bits of the other systems that were out at the time. I do recall, and they do mention this on the wiki, but I can't actually find it on the wiki because it's fucking long. I just remember as a kid, like reading the magazines and shit before it come out, all the code names for it, and it was actually going to be called the Ultra 64.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Remember all of that? Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was initially going to be called the Ultra 64, but then Nintendo changed the name to the Nintendo 64. I do believe it did have another code name before Ultra 64, which if I can find it on this long-ass wiki, I will let you know later. But it was an interesting time for gaming, I think, guys, and I think you two will agree, being of a similar age, because... at the time, I felt, as I was only about 13, 14-year-old, heavy into gaming, heavy into technology. The future was going towards CD-based systems, whereas Nintendo were kind of sticking to their guns with cartridge-based system, aka the N64, and the N64 was actually the last mainstream console that took cartridges, because everyone else went, because the next system went on CDs and everyone else was CDs, and then obviously it went on to DVDs and shit after that. But it's interesting because at the time, the Final Fantasy series was a Nintendo kind of game. It was always on the Nintendo systems. And then because Nintendo wanted to stay with cartridges for the N64, it was the main reason why then Squaresoft moved over to PlayStation for Final Fantasy VII, and we all know, the legacy that game holds. So, that's just an interesting tidbit for those people that didn't know that. I didn't know this, but the lifespan was from 96 to 2002. So it's quite a long.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and you got to think the GameCube came out within that time frame, which we'll get into, as I say, in a bit. But yeah, it lasted a while. It was, really, really cool. Had a very interesting controller, if you guys remember it, where it was like 3 prongs coming out the bottom with a stick in the middle.
It was shite.
D-pad.
It's one of my least favourite controllers ever, to be honest.
It's described as an M shape, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind it, actually, to be fair.
It was quite comfortable to hold, but it just looked like an abomination.
Yeah.
It was. It depends how you were playing it, because you couldn't hold it. It was like if you use either side ones, it was kind of like a normal controller, but then you couldn't use the analog stick, or the buttons underneath the bottom. It's very weird. It's a weird control. I mean, I've got the Switch version that they brought out.
Yeah,
it was on offer, and I was like, oh, maybe memory is playing tricks on me. I was like, yeah, it's not that nice.
No, I didn't think it was too bad. So the first code name for the N64, just found it, was Project Reality. So
that's strange.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that in. I just found it. So, the controller was good. Nintendo have always been different to everyone else, and got to give them credit for that, for always doing something different. But a controller, it was odd. I remember my mate Dave, but he's the one who had the 64. I was the PlayStation, and I had the PlayStation, and I used to bring the PlayStation around his house, and we'd play each other's consoles. But he's got really big hands. So, like with the 64 controller, you either got to hold with your hand in the middle for the stick, and then your other hand on the right for the buttons, or you have to move your left hand to the left to use the D-pad. Well, he used to hold it like a normal controller, but his thumb would reach the thumbstick as well. So he used to hold it like a normal controller. It was really odd. Wow. And one other thing, he was really, really good at GoldenEye. We used to play GoldenEye all the time. And it got to the point where we both know if we'd killed each other, where we would where we'd spawn again. Because it had like a spawn rotation, and then you memorize where all the good guns are, and all the power ups and stuff.
Do you remember when people used to put the remote explosives on the spawn points and just blow people up as soon as they spawned? And there'd be many arguments going on for that.
Yeah,
and then anyone who picked Odd Job would get a punch.
Yeah, good old Odd Job. But where I'm getting to with my story is, Dave was really, really good at GoldenEye, and he actually entered the UK GoldenEye competition, and I went I went to London with him for this competition, and he got 3rd place, which that's bloody good. If you think, there was hundreds of people there, and it had all the knockout rounds and all that stuff. It got to third place, so that was really, really cool to see. But yeah, a really great system. So obviously we talked about GoldenEye. I mean, that game has such a legacy; it's unbelievable. So much so that it's been re-released this year on the Switch and on the Xbox because of licensing issues. It's taken a long time for that because Rare owns some of it, and obviously Microsoft own Rare, but Nintendo holds some of the licenses as well. And so, is it which picture company owns it? I forget.
MGM.
MGM. So you know what it's like. And then there was that the game as in itself. I know I've talked about this before, but just to reiterate, there was actually a full remake done for Xbox Live Arcade for the Xbox 360, but it never released because of licensing issues. But it leaked online a couple of years ago. So if you've got an emulator on your PC, you can download the ROM and play it, or you can play it on a Xbox 360 that's been modded. So a couple of options there, and it's really, really good actually. Much better than the fucking ones that come out this year. So yeah, I mean the N64 in my mind was a great system, had 4 controller ports on the front, and it really was first and foremost a really good multiplayer console, because if you think back then, the internet was still in its infancy, and gaming was still one of those things where you all played in person together, couch co-op versus all on one TV. And I think with the introduction of the 4 controller ports on the front, made it easier because most consoles at the time only had 2 controller ports, and you had to spend money on a multi-tap. So really, really big props to Nintendo on that one. So just another thing about the console itself, it did have a few revisions during its life cycle. So back as with back then, consoles were a lot more fun, I found, because they'd always release these consoles in different colors, and the N64 was one of them. They released like see-through ones, blue, pink, green, red, whatever, So that was really cool. But then they also, I do remember, I think it might have been for Lilac Wars, they released this kind of RAM, was it a RAM expansion pack thing?
Yeah, the expansion pack.
Yeah, what was it like? It was extra RAM, right? Like
it's basically similar to the SAT, and it was an extra memory port that went into the little bit
also,
at the front.
Webby,
yeah.
Don't say fucking Lilac Wars.
Yes.
Oh, Star Fox.
Lilac Wars.
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. I'm sure it was called
Lilac Wars. Was the shitty name it was given in Europe.
Yeah, because they weren't allowed to call it.
Oh, so that's what it was for us.
64. Yeah, I always thought it was a different game, and then I read this game looks very similar.
Star Fox 64 was amazing, really, really good.
Was it really?
It was one of the ones I always remember playing a lot of time into, because there's that level that's kind of like Independence Day with the giant spaceship and all the little ships coming out of it constantly. It was like a proper dogfight.
Yeah. So anyway, all I remember for what was it? Fuck it. I'm sure it was a RAM expansion.
Yeah, it's just called the expansion pack.
Yeah, I'm not sure kind of what it did. Yeah, it was RAM. It was 4 megabytes of extra RAM. Yeah. So I just had to look it up online.
Yeah, because I had to get that to play Turok.
Ah, right. Was it a necessity for Turok or not?
I think it was, yes. Because it had like a really weird, like reddish mesh top bit to it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, so it increased the console's RAM from 4 meg to 8 meg. Yeah, it was, yeah, okay. The expansion pack was bundled with some games as well, like Donkey Kong 64.
Yeah, I think it came with Perfect Dark as well.
Another fantastic game.
Yeah, reminds me of GoldenEye. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, very similar.
Oh, this is quite interesting. I know I'm going off on a tangent here. So, the expansion pack is required to run Donkey Kong 64 and Majora's Mask, which we'll talk about Majora's Mask later. Perfect Dark, which was a great game, it blocks access to the single player campaign when there is no expansion port present. How crazy is that?
Yeah, I remember some of them you either needed them 100% or you could play bits of them. But yeah, I think that's what it was. But
yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's just something that I just seem to remember. Just another little fascinating tidbit. And there was something else that I remember very. I remember a lot about the N64, and I do need to make a note about something for the GameCube because it just reminded me. But there was another expansion thing for the 64, which I don't think ever came out in Europe, but I remember hearing about it
The
a lot.
64DD.
Yeah, the 64 double D, which stands for disk drive.
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
actually a floppy disk drive as well. It wasn't like CDs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, they were like weird, proprietary, weird Nintendo floppy disks,
So
like magnetic
weird.
disks. They just, for some reason, well, I understand why Nintendo were just terrified of piracy and things like that. And like I said, similar to with the GameCube later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, apart from the Wii and the Wii U, I think that's the only two consoles to ever use a normal disc for Nintendo. What you say, like DVDs or whatever. But yeah, like you said, it cost them quite a lot with like the multi-platform games that just wouldn't fit on there.
Yeah.
And like I said, like the big one was Final Fantasy one, which was pretty much a Nintendo thing.
Yeah.
And there's some videos out there of they were showing you. It wasn't Final Fantasy VII, but they did some like tech demos of Final Fantasy VI in 3D, just like the battle system and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
There's a few of those out there, which they are pretty cool. But yeah, Nintendo, like Sony, were just really on top of it, weren't they, early on?
Yeah. Now this 64 double D is quite interesting because it also apparently it gave the N64 access to the internet. So it allows you to capture images from an external video source, allow players to connect to the now defunct Japanese RANDnet online service. It was a mail order only release. The 64 Double D wasn't around for very long. Only 9 games were released for it, including 4 Mario Artist games. Many of the planned games for the Double D just came out on cartridge in the end. Just quite interesting that had this really funky add-on that only came out in Japan. But just going back to talking about the N64, like it was really, I don't know about you guys, but what I found with it, like, because obviously it was during the PS1 era and the Saturn and that, and I was a big PS1 gamer. Like, whenever I played the N64, like, the games all looked very similar. And what I mean by that is it all looked like cardboard cutouts kind of stuck together. Does that make sense to you? Like the way everything was kind of that like flat edges and they, just look like paper. You know what I mean? Don't all
Yeah,
feel
I know
quite
what you
well.
mean. Yeah, I think it's just the way they. I mean, I don't even know if they had. I probably should have checked, but whether they actually used polygons and triangles, whereas Saturn used like squares rather than triangles. So that's why Saturn's 3D always looked a bit different compared to PS1's 3D stuff. So But yeah, I know what you mean. A lot of the games looked very well. Obviously, Donkey Kong 64, Banjo Kazooie, Banjo Tooie, and all that sort of thing. They look
Yeah.
very,
It was really weird
very
because
similar.
it just felt to me like most N64 games I played all used the kind of the same graphic engine because they all looked very similar.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's one of those systems, like the you go back and play like a Mega Drive or a SNES game. It's quite easy to go back and play them because of those art styles. I don't think really age, whereas like that era of games with the PS1, N64, and all that, it's really hard to play those games now because of there's that transition to the early 3D. It
Yeah,
just looks but ugly now. You know what I mean? It's just
yeah.
bleh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I say, that was the first like 3D consoles, whereas 2D, the pixel art side scrolling, that doesn't really age. Plus, obviously when you stretch it out to a HD TV, it looks even worse.
yeah, 100%
So
agree with you
because I
there.
think they
Yeah.
used a bit of the curvature of the old TVs,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but yeah, like I say, I didn't play many 64 games. Like I didn't own one until years later.
Yeah.
But
No.
yeah, I remember like all like the arguing in like the playground. I was like, oh well, that's an N64, so that's because that's 64-bit, so
Yeah.
it's twice as powerful as PS1. I was like, is it really? It
Yeah.
doesn't look it.
I mean, I do think the N64, was a good console, but I mean, you can't compare it to the PS1 because the PS1 just had so many more fucking good games in my opinion. Just talking about a couple of games that I personally played and really enjoyed on the N64, and I'm pretty sure I've forgotten some. I'm pretty sure there was a Castlevania game on there that I remember quite enjoying, which I haven't written down. Um, but obviously the main ones, right? So Golden I've already talked about, fucking amazing. To listen to the rest of this week's awesome episode, you need to subscribe to the Patreon. So head on over to patreon.com/360gamercast. From there, you'll be able to listen to all of this week's show, which is around 2 hours long, and all our previous episodes, including our PlayStation series of episodes and our Xbox series of episodes. Oh, and also our Sega series of episodes. Loads of content for you to go through. So, again, to subscribe, head on over to patreon.com/360gamercast.